Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Renu Tyagi from Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. Today we will be talking about the module Gender and Aging from the paper Biosocial Gerontology. The learning objectives of this module is to study the gender differentials in aging. Let's have an introduction first. Aging is a natural process of becoming older and older. It is a universal reality. Aging is a natural process of becoming older and older. It is a universal reality. According to Tibetus, aging is the survival of a growing number of people who have completed the traditional adult role of making a living and child rearing. Hess in 1976 defines aging as an inevitable and irreversible biological process of life. Different cultural values and social expectations apply according to the gender and age groups, and therefore there are socially structured variation in the personal experience of aging. In terms of longevity, men do not survive as much as women. Globally, women comprise 55% of the population aged 60 years and above in 2000. Although their share is projected to decline during 2000 to 2050, they will continue to comprise a majority of the aged population. The decline in the mortality rate has been accompanied by an increased female longevity. As a result, the elderly sex ratio, that is number of females per 100 males of the elderly population, has tended to rise continuously. This has resulted in the increased feminization of the aging, that is an excess of the women over men in the elderly population. Sociologically, it indicates a shift in the gender roles in society. Women and men age differently in all aspects of life, including the physical, psychological, emotional as well as the social. Yet, debates of gender and development tend to neglect the life course impact gender discrimination have on both men and women. The more importance is given to the needs and rights of the women in reproductive age or to the development and rights to the girl child. Following the cultural definition of aging by Kohli, it can be stated that for women, aging is considered to appear much earlier as culturally at this age. Women is free from the natural reproductive responsibility due to menopause, which is considered as a sign of getting old. In addition, other signs of being old is of attaining the status of mother-in-law and grandmother. Arrival of the daughter-in-law and birth of the grandchildren changes social status of women in the family. Mother's roles at home is taken over by the new member, that is daughter-in-law, and with the arrival of the grandchildren, the woman gains the status of a grandmother, a sociological symbol of being an old woman. Closer to the women is the fact that marriage of one son or daughter and the birth of the grandchildren may mark the start of old age much more clearly than the passing of the year. Whether experiencing a longer life expectancy is necessarily an advantage to women, however, is far more nuanced since larger proportion of them compared with the older men tend to live greater number of years in disability. Owing to their shorter, healthier life expectancy and higher survival rates compared with the men, this demographic trend in fact serves to reinforce the statement that women get sick, men die. In this case, this demographic advantage of older women may instead be regarded as a disadvantage because their need for formal and informal care increases at an older age, and it is at the same time that their health conditions becomes burdensome to them. Early research in gerontology has focused only on the issues related to the elderly male without adequate importance to the women's issues. However, it is but natural that the patriarchal control throughout their lives shapes many of the problems faced by the women in old age. The feminist theories analyze that the system of patriarchy subordinates the women since birth by controlling their sexuality, reproduction and labor through the system of marriage, religion, market and the state. Women have faced gender bias throughout their lives. A woman is considered always dependent economically on their children, especially their son in the absence of their husbands. Thus, the problem of older women are not so much a product of the aging process, rather it is a product of the subordinate status of women throughout their life cycle. They are facing the multiple challenges of physical and mental health hazards, economic vulnerability and burden of the caregiving responsibilities, social isolation, family rejection, humiliation, social insecurity and neglect. Indian women are poorer than men not only in health but also in education and income level. The share of the national income earned by the Indian women amounted in 1992 to a mere 19%. More number of females is facing financial problems and they have experienced deprivation in income and are leading unhappy life, which would have caused the poor adjustment in the aged females. Compared to old men, older women are likely to be more in number, widowed, caregivers to the other relatives, poor, ill and therefore vulnerable to abuse and institutionalization. Apart from widowhood, women also have less access to the skill formation, education, health care and other sources of private and public support. Indeed, the concerns of the oldest old should be viewed primarily as the concerns of the older women. As compared to men, women have more chances to have had a lifetime of disadvantage, from being a widowed to losing access to the property. Along with it, poor education, no access to health services, poor nutrition in earlier life often leave the women with few resources and poor health in old age. In other words, the process of aging for the women is linked to their hitherto quality of life. It is assumed that socialization and opportunities available to women affect their whole life and extend to do so in their old age also. Now let's have a look at the global picture of the older women. The number of older women is much smaller than that of the younger people. It is increasing at a very faster rate. Until recently, the share of the older women was mainly growing in the developed region. It is likely to increase further in 2050. This growth has attributed to long-term decline in the fertility, which reduced the share of the younger people in the total population, and to increased life expectancy as a result of health care and improved health practices. The same conditions are now occurring in the developing regions. However, the percentage of female in the oldest old population, that is 80 plus, is decreasing to some extent over the years in the world, more developed and less developed regions. This table shows the oldest old women accounting for 64.1% of the world oldest old population. This table shows the feminization of the population aging. A similar trend is noticed in more developed and less developed regions. But in the Southeast Asia region, the opposite trend can be marked. For instance, while the oldest old women comprised 59.4% in 2000, their number are expected to increase 62.9% and 63.8% in 2025 and 2050 respectively. India is one of the few countries of the world where males outnumber females. This phenomena among older people is of prime importance as female life expectancy at ages 60 years and above is higher than that of the men. The high levels of the economic dependence and disability among the older women are a cause of concern because of the feminization of later years when females outnumber males at the advanced ages. Feminization of the aging leads to issues relating long-term healthcare financing since women are more susceptible to chronic illnesses. Then there are the problem of medical care, nursing and especially the nature of geriatrics services that would need. As women age, they face a double burden of discrimination both as the older people and as a woman. Societies marginalize and discriminate against older women, especially elderly female, by considering them unproductive burdens on their families and the nation. Since older women are more socially and economically vulnerable than the older men, they are likely than men to live alone, requiring continued economic resources and or support. Generally, they are neglected and abused by their own children. The cumulative effects of the lifetime nutritional deprivation, hazardous occupations, heavy work, and the low level of self-esteem leave them physically and mentally frail, while widowhood often leaves them destitute. The concerns for the elderly women are pertinent because of the feminization of later years of life. Current societal arrangements tend to make women less powerful than men and make them less competent to advocate for their own health. In fact, irrespective of their age, women's power and independence in most societies in India are negatively affected. The main social effect of the extension of life in their later years for the women is the extended period of widowhood. In India, a fairly large proportion of elderly are single, mainly due to the death of the spouse. Divorce and separation are less rampant in our country compared to the West, especially in the older generation. However, the percentage of widows is disproportionately larger than the widowers. Widowhood as an event is not an uncommon life experience among older people. In the West, by the age of 75, about 25% of all males and 67% of all females are widowed. Widowhood makes an important difference to the quality of life of the older women. Probably the most obvious effect is the lowering of the socio-economic status of widow. Even in developed countries, widowhood is found to lower the living standards of the women. It is reported that married persons tend to enjoy higher level of survival, have better mental health, utilize more health services, participate more in social activities, and also report higher life satisfaction. Now let's have a look at the living conditions of the elderly. It has become obvious that the joint family system is slowly vanishing, even in rural India. Urbanization, industrialization, migration, and other related social changes have changed the family structure and function dramatically. One offshoot of this change is the number of elderly who are living alone. Widowhood, migration of children, and adjustment problems with the children force the elderly to often live alone. The National Sample Survey Organization report in 1986-87 reported 8% of the urban and 5.9% of the rural elderly to be on their own. Still living with the married children is the most common living arrangement seen in India. Co-residence with a married son and his family is more prevalent in India than in the Western countries. Institutionalization of the elderly, that is moving towards the old age home, is not a popular option and still draws social disapproval. Let's have a look at the economic status of the elderly women. A global view of the situation of women reveals three starting facts: that more women than men are poor, older women are poorer, and the proportion of the poorer women is growing with development. There is a growing feminization of poverty, with women becoming poorer as they grow older. It is not just in the third world that women are poor. Even Canada, with one of the best social security programs for elderly, confesses that its older women are living in the genteel poverty compared to more abject poverty of elderly women in the United States of America. Poverty among the elderly in India is much more intense, as even in full adulthood, many people only manage to make out a living. Poverty and inadequate income leads to dependence on the children. Perhaps the most pressing problem that elderly women face is their dependence on others and financial insecurity. Many women who are old today have not worked throughout their adult life. There is a considerable difference between the workforce participation rate of the elderly male and female. It is clear that a high percentage of women, both urban and rural, are economically dependent on their families. Economic hardship in Indian families seems to have aggravated the breakdown in the traditional caring for the elderly. Findings from the cross-sectional and national surveys revealed that financial stringency is the main reason why middle and the economic level families cannot maintain elderly life. About 3/4 of the elderly females stated to be fully dependent in economic terms, which may make families more unwilling to care the female relatives. Now let's have a look at the mental health of the elderly women. The psychiatric disorder of the aged fall mainly into two groups, the affective and psycho-organic disorder. In India, around 4 million people aged 60 years and above are said to be suffering from the mental illness, and 2/3 of these are diagnosed as depressed. Apart from declining mental power, factors such as poor health, societal attitude, loss of social status, and economic problems affects the mental health of the elderly. Suicidal behavior due to depression or due to social and economic reasons is also not uncommon. Sick elderly usually have a minimum of 3 clinical diagnoses and 5 to 6 symptoms. More than any other health problem of the women, mental health is conditioned by the cultural factors. There are also strong age and gender biases in the perception, diagnosis, reporting of the mental health. There are several major questions in the area of mental illness of the older women. Depression is a common mental health problem experienced by the older women and can arise out of the several stresses that women face as they age. Mild depression is associated with the losses experienced at different times over the later life course, the most common being the widowhood. Such roles are lost due to breakup of the joint family and migration of the adult children. Another important role that is bestowed on the older women is that of a grandmother. Now, there are some gender discrimination and unequal access among the elderly. Gender is an important variable that influences the quality of life at all ages. Elderly people and the particularly elderly women are marginalized without any state protection. It is assumed that the women's primary involvement is in reproductive labor, unpaid household work, and caregiving, and such notion often restricts women employment opportunities, mobility, educational attainment, and skill development. Gender and age discrimination accompanied by the physical and emotional vulnerability make the life of older women difficult. Low social status, discriminatory practices, early marriage, multiple pregnancies, and poor attention to health issues are responsible for the poor health status of older women. Societies assign different age expectations according to gender, socio-cultural norms, and role assignments. Loneliness, socio-economic insecurity, medical insecurity, and human rights are the major issues for elderly women, especially in the developing nation. India represents wide gender gap when it comes to education and employment opportunities, and these gaps have existed for a long time in the country. Socio-cultural norms and economic factors still prevent girls from getting education opportunities. Among elderly population, only 50% of the elderly men and 20% of the elderly women were literate through formal schooling. Elderly women have high level of illiteracy. There is a wide gender gap in education that is predicted to continue. This further limits the ability of the elderly women to be active member of their society and interfere with their access to the fundamental human rights. The old age pension schemes for elderly women are very restricted, including women only from below poverty line, that is BPL category. This categorization is also not very inclusive. These women receive an amount of rupees 200 per month only as the old age pension that is not sufficient. These schemes do not include the women from the lower middle and middle class families. Their economic needs are not paid serious attention. Property right should always be made joint for men and women, as in India, there is no automatic transfer of the property right to the wife on its own after the death of a husband. This is very important because most women are outliving their husbands in the twilight years of their lives. For instance, if a husband is suffering with a disease like dementia that cause memory loss, etc., the children and others can take advantage of the situation and the needy elderly woman is left behind. In many traditional societies, including India, women have limited access to the right of the inheritance or property ownership, and most of the women do not receive the benefit of pension scheme or provident funds. Therefore, they depend on the family or the state for financial support and living arrangements. Elderly women continue to endure unequal and inadequate access to wealth, property and resource across cultures. Elderly women, especially widows, face substantial gender differential in the ownership of property and assets, in role and participation in the family as compared to the aged men in India, hence influencing their access to the basic necessities of life. Now let's see some of the health issues among the elderly women. The quality of the life of the elderly women is closely related to their health. In India, the caregiving duties assigned to women are significant, yet a visible part of the women's domestic labor. The responsibilities of caring for a sick spouse, children, grandchildren and relatives often fall to women, and that can have consequences for the physical and psychological health of the women. In addition, the physical immobility has declined for the elderly men and women both. Women have longer life expectancies than men globally due to female hormonal protective factors, risk factors related with male working conditions, lifestyles and higher risk of injury. Women generally live longer, they experience greater morbidity and have less access to health care than men. The non-communicable diseases such as heart disease and stroke are significant cause of the death and disability in women worldwide, especially the poor women. Aging women are more vulnerable to age-related diseases, especially the breast cancer, memory disorders like the dementia and Alzheimer, osteoporosis and rheumatoid arthritis, making them more dependent on the care services. Old age problems such as osteoarthritis and osteoporosis are associated with limited quality of life and disability. Postmenopausal women are more susceptible to osteoporosis and cardiovascular diseases. Osteoporosis is a degenerative disease of the bones, which is the second most common metabolic disease in India. There are more than 6 crore of people with osteoporosis in India, according to the Delhi Osteoporosis Foundation. Poor access to primary healthcare services among elderly women could be explained on the account of the lack of transportation facilities, their low literacy level, and poor socioeconomic status. The relation between poverty and ill health has been universally established. Poverty affects older women more in the rural areas. In most of the Indian hospitals, there are no gerontologists who can exclusively provide their services to the elderly, especially the elderly women. Whereas in the developed countries, there are exclusive geriatric wards and geriatricians. Elderly women get depressed with the deteriorating or reduced physical ability, changing physical appearances, migration of children and difference in generational ideas. In many Indian families, women are not involved into decision-making processes. Often they are reduced to play the role of a caretaker in the family. They have both health and the emotional insecurities that further gets intensified due to lack of social security measures. Now let's summarize this module. So far, we have understood that women live longer than men in India. This has resulted in the increased feminization of aging, that is, an excess of the women over men in elderly population. Women and men age contrarily in major aspects of life, including physical, psychological, emotional as well as social. Women age earlier than men, as attaining the status of mother-in-law and grandmother makes her old, while it is not the same in case of men. From being a widow to losing the access to property, women suffer more. Men are happily allowed to marry again, while women are forbidden. Feminization of the aging leads to issues relating long-term health care financing, since women are more susceptible to chronic illnesses. The cumulative effect of the lifetime nutritional deprivation, hazardous occupations, heavy work, and the low level of self-esteem leave them physically and mentally frail, while widowhood often leaves them destitute. But in some societies, women in old age experience more power, especially on son and daughter-in-laws. Since gender is an important aspect of aging, the research on the relation of two should be imperative. Thank you.